120 shrines in the game, and I got every single damn one, so I feel like I'm qualified to talk about their contribution to the experience. Out of those 120 shrines, about half of them are either blessing shrines or test of strength shrines. Blessing shrines just give you the spirit
I want to say half. There's a good portion though.
orb and chest without a puzzle, so you basically just walk in, grab your prize, and leave.
But to that point, you only got a blessing shrine if you went out of your way and did something like did an overtly difficult challenge to find that shrine to begin with, which is why you got a blessing shrine as a reward. Because let's be real, if we did those objectives, if we did those quests to find the shrine just to give like just to end up with another challenge, I feel like a lot of people would be pissed off. Blessing shrines acted like a reward. Now, I agree with not the blessing shrines, but I agree with his point on the major test of strength shrines. I feel like those were kind of lazy, although you got some handy tools, weapons. What's the word I'm looking for? Whatever. Let's. I'm just gonna go with weapons, items, whatever items. You got some pretty good items depending upon when you found them, but I feel like if you're starting off early in the game, you find a major test of strength, it's just entirely not worth breaking all your weapons to get a Guardian Axe plus plus that's gonna break in like 5 hits, you know. So I feel like not only that was lazy, but there's also no benefits to major, minor, and modest test of strengths. So I agree with whatever he has to say on those three kinds of shrines. Let's just say that before we press play.
These shrines felt like a useless formality to me during my playthrough. Why not have two chests outside of the shrine and then a fast travel beacon? It would save the player time and trim a lot of the loading screens that already plague the shrine system. But blessing shrines are not nearly as ridiculous as test of strength shrines. Tests of strength put the player up against a guardian enemy of varying difficulty, minor, moderate, or major, depending on the shrine. The main issue here is that the circumstances of the fight remain the same each time. It's the same enemy with the same weapons in the same futuristic room over and over again. I realize that expecting Nintendo to create a new enemy for each test of strength is unrealistic, but what about 3 different ones, one for each difficulty? Is that so much to ask from the greatest game ever? So not only does the
It, that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what happened, bro. Bro, there's that's exactly what.
create a new enemy for each test of strength is unrealistic, but what about 3 different ones, one for each difficulty? Is that so much to ask from the
Okay, I'm gonna cut him some slack with this one. I feel like he meant like not guardians, you know. But there's 3 levels. So like if you get a minor test of strength, you fight a Guardian Scout 1. If you fight a modest test of strength, that's a Guardian Scout 2. Major test of strength was a Guardian Scout 3. Those are all Guardian Scouts, yes, but they literally, as he described, they're like a tier above one another depending upon which test you got with the shrine, which is just more health and more weapons. But and some more move. No, not even more move sets. Just more health and more weapons. So, I mean, but he literally described what they put in the game, and said that they and said what that had been too much to ask for when they put that in the game. That's exactly what they did.
greatest game ever? Different same weapons in the same futuristic room over and over again. I realize that expecting Nintendo to create a new enemy for each test of strength is unrealistic, but what about 3 different ones, one for each difficulty? Is that so much to ask from the greatest game ever? So not only does the player know that every cool landmark leads to a shrine, they also know that there's a 50% chance that shrine has a boring test of strength or a blessing in it, neither of which contribute positively to the game experience in any way. But that still leaves the other 60 shrines.
So they contribute to the game experience, period. Yes, of course they do. They provide you with guardian weapons. First of all, there's ancient proficiency, which, if you don't know, if you're using a guardian weapon against a guardian, you're going to kill it a little faster than you normally would with another weapon, despite the guardian weapon potentially being weaker than the other weapon. That's guardian proficiency. Um, Two, you get that in exchange of a weapon that has lower durability than the majority of the other weapons. So basically, you know the Royal Guards set, it's basically like that, But the Royal Guard set was like just it didn't do any particular damage against any particular enemy, but the gist with the Royal Guard set was that you get these extremely buffed weapons for extremely low durability. And that's kind of the gist with these Guardian weapons that you get from the Major, Minor, and Modest Test of Strength. So to say that it didn't add any gameplay or enhancing experience, I guess that's not really true. And I'm gonna show you this real quick. Just give me a sec. I'm gonna show you this right here. I feel like I'm gonna cut him some slack on that because I really think that's just a mistake. Because if you played all of Breath of the Wild, you know it's a fact that there's, especially doing all the shrines, you just know that there are different tiers of enemies in different tests of strength. But anyways, here we go. So you find this one um in the minor test of strength. Let's get back in it.
Which had unique puzzles in them. While these are undoubtedly
Tier shrine. And actually, no, I think I fucked that up. No. Okay. This was okay. Yeah, my bad. This was minor. This was modest. This is major. So yeah, but let's get back in it.
which had unique puzzles in them. While these are undoubtedly leads to a shrine, they also know that there's a 50% chance that shrine has a boring test of strength or a blessing in it, neither of which contribute positively to the game experience in any way. But that still leaves the other 60 shrines, which had unique puzzles in them. While these are undoubtedly the best shrines in the game, except for the ones with motion controls, they still aren't deserving of the praise Zelda fans give them. Be honest, if you played the game, how many times did you just get frustrated and start cycling through Sheikah abilities until something glowed? For me, that's how a large portion of the puzzle shrines played out. I also hear
I feel like a very small percentage of people did that, probably because they were either they couldn't figure out the puzzle, or they were just bored of the shrine. But I mean, like I said earlier, there were some really good shrines, there were some okay shrines, and then there were some lazy shrines. And we're now at this point we're talking about the actual puzzle shrines.
time and time again how Breath of the Wild's puzzles let the player solve them in their own way. If you could see me, I'm doing air quotes. Just imagine I'm doing air quotes. Anyway, puzzles are the only time where letting the player solve them in their own way is a bad thing. Puzzles have one answer. That's what makes them puzzles. If you could fit the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together in any combination, I doubt you would be satisfied with completing it. In Breath of the Wild, so many of the puzzle shrines could be solved by cutting corners or using Sheikah abilities to subvert the challenge. But hey, at least there's awesome gear waiting at the end, right?
No. The fucking rewards for the shrines were terrible. They were terrible. But the point he made before that, cutting corners, unless you're shooting yourself with bombs while you're in bullet air time, that's cutting corners, right? I feel like allowing the player to solve the puzzle in their own way makes adds a sense of personal gratification. You could do it the conventional way, but then there's also, because it's Breath of the Wild, it's like I feel like if there is let's say we were to restart playing Breath of the Wild, right? We played Breath of the Wild on another account, right? You know how boring it would be if there was just only one clear-cut way to solve a puzzle in Breath of the Wild. Although it's a puzzle, I feel like the exact opposite of his point would happen. If there were multiple ways to solve a puzzle, a shrine in Breath of the Wild, and you came up with one of those ways beforehand, whether it's using your runes or whatever, it's going to feel more gratifying because you solved it in your way and not the clear-cut way that maybe it was intended to be solved in. Because Breath of the Wild has, just so many different ways of moving objects and manipulating items around you, I feel like that's a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Not exactly. This is sort of a tangent, but this is something that makes me so upset about game design because it's really not that hard, and so many games drop the ball on this. Firstly, there needs to be objectively powerful gear, and secondly, that powerful gear needs to be hard to get. That's it. This is one of the few things that loot shooters like Borderlands and Destiny get right. The best gear is always hard to get, and it's usually so powerful that every player will go to the ends of the earth to get it. Unfortunately, Breath of the Wild doesn't have either of those things. I bought armor at Hateno Village, which is accessible very early in the game, and I upgraded that armor all the way through until the end of the game. If gear you get 5 hours into the game is still viable 50 hours into the game, that is indicative of a broken gear system.
It would be if all gear acted the same. Upgrading your gear, all it does is it lowers the amount of damage you take while being hit with that gear. But there's multiple pieces of gear that you either obtain through quests, through damn, you keep going black on me. Through quests, through mission objectives that aren't available in shops, right? And those gear, each gear set has a different purpose, whether it's stealth, whether it's purely defense, whether it's attack boost, whether it's climb speed, whether it's shock resistance, whether it's snow walk or run speed, whether it's sand run speed. You know, all of these gear sets have different purposes. So whether you go out of your way, which I don't know how you could fully upgrade a gear set before the end of the game. I just don't know. First of all, gear's expensive when you first come across it. Like when you go to Kakariko Village, which is one of the first objectives in the game, you have the entire ninja or the stealth armor set. And that's like 2,000 rupees. The odds of you having 2,000 rupees by the time you get to Kakariko Village are slim to none. So usually what happens is you sell a good portion of the things that you've collected so far, and you get like one or two pieces of the gear. But yeah, so I just don't see, you know, whatever. But I mean, the reason why it's viable at whatever, like at from level 5 to 50 or whatever you said, is because each gear serves a different purpose. But there was something he made before that. It was like game breaking gear. There's no point in adding or making game breaking gear hard to get. You know what? I'm gonna let him explain further on that. Maybe he does, because, you know.
Armor at Hateno Village, which is accessible very early in the game, and I upgraded that armor all the way through until the end of the game. If gear you get 5 hours into the game is still viable 50 hours into the game.
I want to go back to hear what he said.
Nintendo could have easily fixed this by giving Link a static, upgradable defense statistic and saving perks for armor sets. This would separate the player's decision-making process when choosing armor and allow players to switch between them without sacrificing defense.
Okay, so that is exactly what's in the game. So like I was saying before you heard me not speak, right? So the numbers on my gear pieces, right? Let's say if I was butt booty ass naked, right? So the number on the gear pieces is indicative of the amount of defense points that I'm going to have by wearing that gear. Okay? My bad. All right, so like I said earlier, the number that is on the bottom right of each gear piece is indicative of the amount of defense points it gives you by wearing that gear. Okay? So let's say, for instance, I'm going to go back to my other example, right? I had the Flame Guard outfit, right? And the reason why it has a 5, while generally everything else has 3s, you know, 3s, I'm going back here, there's 3s, but this is 5. You see the star next to it? That's because I went to a fairy, a great fairy, whatever, and I upgraded that particular set of gear, right? Now, let's say, so with the 3 sets of gear that have 5 defense points, I have a total of 15 defense points by wearing all 3 pieces of the gear. Now let's say that I wanted I wanted to keep this Flame Guard on, but I also want my swim speed to be up, right? Let's say that. Now, because I also upgraded the Zora helm, and even if I didn't upgrade, let's say if I have the Opal earrings, right? I have 13 total defense points while still holding on to this these abilities that each of the gear sets give me. So basically, what he said wasn't in the game is in the game. A static system so that you can have that you can switch gears out, or sorry, switch pieces of gears out, which allows the player to be cognizant of their defense stat, which that's exactly what's in the game. I don't know. I hope you guys heard my first point about the armor set. I think I had said something like, you know what? If we didn't get it, it's okay. But let's continue. Yeah, but basically, you have. I basically said the point of it's not necessarily a bad armor set because you have different armor pieces which do different things. So it's not like I have this piece of armor, now I don't need any other piece of armor ever, because he said if one piece of armor is viable 5 hours into the game and it's still viable 50 hours in the game, it's indicative of a bad armor system. Not necessarily, because people, or sorry, what am I saying, dude? People. Because different armor sets have different bonuses. There's different reasons as to why you would buy different armor sets. It's not like I put on my stealth set and that's just it. That's just armor. That's just armor, period. You know what I'm saying? That gives me a stealth boost. If I put on my Zora gear, that gives me a swim boost. There is an incentive to buy different armor sets, and you have the ability to upgrade the defense perks on those armor sets on top of having the initial perk that the armor set provides. But let's continue.
These armor sets are considered to be the best in the game, but the effort required to get them is not commensurate with their utility in the slightest.
They are. They're not commensurate, but they definitely could have been a little harder to get.
The Barbarian armor set can be found in 3 chests scattered around the map.
Right here. Over here. And then over here. Traveling to those 3 points of the map is kind of tedious just to get this set right here. It's kind of tedious.
Or more accurately, just one Google search. The ancient armor can be purchased from a vendor in exchange for ancient cores, an item that can be obtained in chests around the map or by killing guardian enemies. A small price to pay for one of the best armor sets in the game, to be sure. Just as there are armor sets that are easy to get, there are also bad armor sets that are really hard to get, namely the Wild set. You'd think that an armor set that bears the game's title would be powerful. That shit was not worth it.
And this shit just got stuck in my fucking teeth. That's gonna itch for a while.
Still, most players want to prioritize functionality over aesthetics, making the Armor of the Wild a gross waste of time for anyone trying to get it. With armor out of the way, let's talk about
It's not a waste of time. It's more so about the journey, not necessarily the reward.
Weapons, which are arguably a bigger disaster. First off, Breath of the Wild's weapons have a superfluous and confusing element system. And I realize at this point it seems like nitpicking. I'm going back and reading through my script here, and it really seems like a minor thing. But it bugs me because it really makes no sense. Fire weapons beat ice enemies, and ice weapons beat fire enemies. And that makes sense. But there's also electric weapons, which don't beat either one, but they electrocute enemies in water. The fact that there's no counter to electric weapons makes fighting against them frustrating. It also negates the player's need for using electric gear. Ice weapons are only useful because they beat fire enemies and vice versa. So why add electric? If you're going to add electric, why not give it a counterpart so at least there's a rock, paper, scissors dynamic? Because the current dynamic is rock, paper, scissors, except rock beats paper, paper beats rock, and scissors sort of beats both but isn't really participating. I don't think rock, paper, scissors would have caught on if it worked that way, but that's just me. The problem with Breath of the Wild's elemental system, though, pales in comparison to the real problem.
So, assuming he meant, like, for the player, there's not really a use of elemental weapons. I mean, but, like, then again, it allows you to steal weapons from higher tier enemies, or if you don't want to necessarily engage with opponents, then having that is worth it. But if you're swimming, if it damages, I feel like, he kind of meant that, like, oh, there's not like a fire beats ice, ice beats fire with the element or with the lightning stuff, lightning weapons. All it does is it allows you to shock enemies in the water, which, sure, but again, it has a greater purpose than shocking enemies in the water. Its purpose is literally to steal weapons if you don't necessarily want to engage the opponents that you're fighting, which sure might be a problem in and of itself, but depending upon how you play the game, that can be extremely resourceful and helpful.
Against them frustrating. It also negates electric weapons, which don't beat either one, but they electrocute enemies in water. The fact that there's no counter to electric weapons makes fighting against them frustrating.
There's no counter. So there is the shock resistance set, but I'm not sure if that's just lightning.
It also negates the player's need for using electric gear.
Electric negates the... No, that's contradicting. if fighting against electric weapons is annoying and frustrating, then electric gear does the exact opposite of negating the purpose of using it. It actually fulfills the purpose of using it, making going up against electric weapons less annoying.
The fact that there's no counter to electric weapons
that is the exact counter.
Makes fighting against them frustrating. It also negates the player's need for using electric gear. Ice weapons are only useful because they beat fire enemies and vice versa. So why add electric? If you're going to add electric, why not give it a counterpart so at least there's a rock, paper, scissors dynamic? Because the current dynamic is rock, paper, scissors, except rock beats paper, paper beats rock, and scissors sort of beats both but isn't really participating. I don't think rock, paper, scissors would have caught on if it worked that way, but that's just me. The problem with Breath of the Wild's elemental system, though, pales in comparison to the real problem, the durability system. One of the inherent pleasures of playing a game with a gear system is getting to choose the gear you prefer. Take Dark Souls, for example. I like using smaller and more agile daggers, but others prefer greatswords, and yet everyone can make it through the game at a similar pace by playing their own way. In Breath of the Wild, the game's design encourages the player to find weapons they like and stow them away forever for fear of them breaking. In the Zelda universe, apparently swords are made of styrofoam because they break constantly. Even higher level swords in the game break after killing 5 to 10 enemies, whereas lower level weapons may break after 5 to 10 swings. This broken, pun intended, system motivates the player to hang on to good weapons and save them just for...
Okay, so he touches upon 2 points. I want to address the first one first, obviously. Now I agree that the durability system, it should have made weapons a smidge more durable. But the problem, I feel like he was critiquing the durability system in general for being there because some people like to play the game with, let's say with one weapon. I'm going to put the screen down. Like with one weapon, like maybe a one-handed sword, right? Maybe the Master Sword. Others prefer to have a two-handed weapon, right? In hand, right? The problem with that, right, of course, is if I were to pick up a Savage Lino Crusher and the durability, if the durability system wasn't there, there would be absolutely no other... There's no incentive of me picking up another Savage Lino Crusher ever again. Every other Savage Lino Crusher that's dropped has no use to me whatsoever. Just because I wanted to play this way, right? And there's no durability system. Every other Savage Lino Crusher that's dropped is completely useless to me because I already have one. You know what I'm saying? The durability system allows you to use different weapons and to use the weapons that you have more tactfully. And because, these weapons have certain uses, again, against certain enemies in certain situations. You know, if you're swarmed by an enemy camp, maybe you swing this fucking Savage Lino Crusher around, right? But if you're fighting like a Silver Lizalfos, maybe you use a one-handed weapon to match its agility, right? So the durability system is completely necessary for the type of game that it's in, which is Breath of the Wild, obviously. And I agree with the fact that weapons break a little too easily, obviously. It breaks a little too easily. But the weapon system is definitely needed. And maybe I don't feel like the player would, use their or like hide or like stow away the weapons that they liked, because there's gonna be another weapon. They're eventually gonna come across a weapon that's possibly better, or just another kind of that same exact weapon at some point in their run. At some point, whether it's 5 minutes after they got the initial weapon or 5 hours after, at some point they're gonna come across either the same kind of weapon or the same weapon as a whole. Maybe I have like a rusty broadsword, right? But I like the two-handed weapons, right? And I don't want to use that. Well, maybe I'll get a knight's claymore a little, further down the road, and that's an even more powerful two-handed weapon that I have in my inventory now. So yeah, I don't. Yeah,
For encounters with
my bad.
stronger enemies. Even higher level swords in the game break after killing 5 to 10 enemies, whereas lower level weapons may break after.
Yeah, you kind of know when your shit's about to break. Like you kind of know how long you have. I wish Nintendo made it a little more unpredictable. Like once you get the notice that your bow is almost broken, you have 3 more shots until it breaks. That it's kind of like repetitive. I feel like they should have shaken up the durability system, but it's completely necessary nonetheless.
After 5 to 10 swings. This broken, pun intended, system motivates the player to hang on to good weapons and save them just for encounters with stronger enemies. I spent the majority of my
That's the
playthrough
point.
using lower level weaponry for common enemies and building an ever-growing collection of good weapons in my backpack. Needless to say, I was extremely prepared for Hyrule Castle, but at the cost of using bad weaponry for the rest of the game. Why create a system where the game's best loot is only useful to the player for a few minutes of gameplay at a time? The argument I hear most is that the durability system.
No. Okay, so your enemies grow with you. That would be a valid point if Red Bokoblin stayed red for the entirety of the game. But you're gonna need those higher level weapons because your weapon or your enemies also evolve as you evolve through the hidden XP system. And that is with how many shrines you have completed and how many enemies you've killed and whatnot. But red bokoblins turn into blue bokoblins, then blue turn into black, then black turn into silver. They're all more powerful than one another. They're basically, that every single Lionel, besides the Lionel in Zora's Domain and the 2 Lionels in Hyrule Castle, every other Lionel is replaced. No matter what color they were previously, they're all going to be at some point replaced with a silver Lionel. Because your enemies grow with you, So having those stronger weapons become more useful. Because enemies are prevalent in the game everywhere, Like once you start getting through the game and you have these higher tier enemies everywhere, you're going to need those higher tier weapons with you at all time. It's not just for a few minutes of gameplay. Eventually, maybe the eventually is the bad part, but nonetheless, eventually you are going to need to use those higher tier weapons 24/7. Because I mean, look at my shit. You don't see anything below 20 unless they have like a specific use. Like this pushes boats, which is why I have it. This cuts down trees, which is why I have it. 60, 20 freezes enemies. 40 steals weapons. 93, 58. You're gonna need these when you get along your run. Dude, trust me, it's not only for a few minutes of gameplay. It will quickly become 24/7 that you need all these higher tier weapons, which is why higher tier enemies drop higher tier weapons to keep the refresh going.
Motivates players to try different weapons, and where the game's best loot is only useful to the player for a few minutes of gameplay at a time. The argument I hear most is that the durability system motivates players to try different weapons, and I agree sort of, but it fails to address the fact that the durability system makes the game less fun. At the end of the day, I would rather find a piece of awesome gear and enjoy using it rather than cycling through tons of weapons just to get by. Having to bring up a menu during a fight several times because I need a new weapon also makes the flow of combat choppy and unsatisfying. In addition, there are ways.
I feel like the quick menu kind of combated that the best way it could, to be completely honest. Unless Breath of the Wild 2 adds hotkeys, I feel like they did a pretty good job with the quick menus. But yes, I do agree with, like, say if you're low on health, you need to eat food and shit. All of a sudden, it does kind of make the gameplay choppy. But I feel like the quick menus address that issue as best as it could.
Ways to get players to try new gear without having weapons break every few minutes. One easy way would have been to make specific side quests give unique weapons as a reward. Currently, Breath of the Wild side quests are a
But then what would happen? They would break.
needless chore designed for players who are patient enough to get 100% completion. Not only do side quests give no unique rewards, they barely give any reward at all.
It's about the journey, not the reward. It's about the journey. That's the point of the side quest. It's in the name, man. It's the journey, the quest.
Even side quests that take a significant amount of time reward something as useless as a red rupee, which is the Breath of the Wild equivalent of a crisp $5 bill. I've been told that side quests are rewarding because they're inherently fun to complete, but in my experience they usually involve doing boring chores for townsfolk, like finding chickens in a pumpkin patch or something.
That was fun.
Making side quests reward Link with unique weaponry would make them a must-play part of the game. Moreover, knowing that there's a worthwhile reward at the end of a given quest would make completing it more bearable, no matter how tedious. Another way to motivate players to experiment with gear is
I agree with that. I feel like there should have been better rewards for the side quests that were given. But then again, it's more so about the quests, and I feel like a lot of Breath of the Wild players recognize that. Like Terrytown, that was an awesome thing, and I guess the reward was having an entire town of your own. But I mean, I don't go to Terrytown for anything, you know. It was it was more so of the journey of like recruiting these people, getting the materials to build an entire town, so I can look at Terrytown and say, I built that, you know. And then in the Terrytown mission, for example, like the rich guy, he bets that you can't kill a guardian, or he'll give you a certain amount of money, like if you beat the guardian. Sure, like he could have gave me more rubies after I beat the guardian, but this dude literally bet me to go down while he's looking down at a hostile environment. I go down there, I kill the guardians, and like I want to bet against that guy. I feel like it's just more so the journey rather than the reward. Although the reward could act as though like could have been more incentivizing. You aren't real like it's more about the journey, which is why people decide to take on side quests. But I've completed, I think all of. Yeah, I think I have 3 that I didn't complete the side quests because I genuinely can't find them. That's the problem with the side quests. Like, there's no way. Like, you're just gonna have to run around Hyrule and find people with red exclamation marks.
make enemies significantly harder in later areas. This could be hard to execute in an open world space like Breath of, no matter how tedious. Another way to motivate players to experiment with gear is to make enemies significantly harder in later areas. This could be hard to execute in an open world space like Breath of the Wild, but it would help the game in a variety of ways. If there were areas in Hyrule that were simply too difficult for an inexperienced player, it would add to the sense of adventure and improvement that the game already has. If my sword does 14 damage and it has little effect on the enemies I'm fighting, I would be motivated to explore other areas and then find something better so I can succeed.
The Colosseum.
And it doesn't matter what kind of weapon I find.
And the Colosseum was good because it wasn't too far from where you started off.
If I were to find a spear that did 20 damage instead of a sword that did 14, I would be motivated to use it. The difficulty of a given area can be all of the motivation the player needs to try new weapons. But instead, the design...
And the funny thing is that literally what he's talking about isn't there. I experienced that when Gabe was playing. Basically, you could go wherever the fuck you want after the Great Plateau. So he ran right into a Lionel. And I was like, oh, that's not a good idea. You know, even if he hit all of the flurry rushes and shit, he just wasn't at a point in the game where he could have killed the Lionel. And so that was fun to see. There are definitely areas in the map that you can't travel towards until you're prepared. Maybe if those areas were more prevalent throughout the game, like the Colosseum, then that would have been a better point. Or, sorry, it would have been better overall. But there are definitely areas that are present that are too difficult for you to, venture before you have the correct gear or until you're adequately prepared.
Design team took another shortcut before
That's
team
definitely a
out
thing
being
in Breath of the
motivated to
Wild.
use it. The difficulty of a given area can be all of the motivation the player needs to try new weapons. But instead, the design team took another shortcut by introducing the frustratingly overstated durability system. When a weapon's shelf life is so low, it totally ruins the experience of finding a new piece of gear. What good is a 50 damage club when I know it's going to break 20 swings later? The easiest fix would have been to scrap the durability system entirely and make good weapons harder to find. This is the system
Nah, nah, nah,
most conventional gear-based games use, and I see no reason to change it.
nah.
Give common enemies equally common gear, and save the great gear for boss drops and difficult quests. This would also
That's the thing, though. Common and that I already addressed this.
add a sense of continuity to the player's progression. Their inventory would serve as a time capsule where the player could remember what specific in-game experience led to each piece of gear. Or, if you really think the durability system was a great addition, at least add a mechanic where players can trade materials for repaired gear. The odd thing is, Breath of the Wild tried both of these things in specific cases. After beating the first Divine Beast, you are rewarded with the Light Scale Trident as a gift from the Zora, the race of people you've just saved. This adds a huge sense of legitimacy to receiving the Trident. There's a definitive moment and reason for you getting the weapon, and using it feels awesome. And if the Trident breaks, which it most certainly will, there's a merchant in the Zora's area who will fix it for you in exchange for materials. This system could be applied across the entire game, with less materials required to repair lower-level gear. That way, a player would still need to use all of the weapons at their disposal, while also having more of a reason to return to towns and villages for repair. Additionally, making players wait longer for better weapons would add some much-needed difficulty to the game, but I'll address that in a moment.
I feel like in some instances, because you can go wherever you want after the Great Plateau, there will be instances where you can have the player find really overpowered weapons and gear and then just fast travel back to a safe location. Like, Style Noxes, I think we can all agree, Style Noxes aren't that hard to kill. And that guarding literally one of the strongest, or the strongest base shield in the game was kind of ridiculous. That was ridiculous. So there are instances where his point holds up here.
For better weapons would add some much-needed difficulty to the game, but I'll address that in a moment. The obvious loophole in the durability system is the Master Sword. In past Zelda games, the Master Sword was clearly the best weapon in the game. Getting it meant that the search for weapons was over. You, the player, had found the most legendary weapon of all time, and it was powerful enough to match its mythos. In Breath of the Wild, however, the Master Sword is only useful because it can't break. In terms of strength, the sword does an unimpressive 30 damage. For reference, by the time I was able to even get to the Master Sword, most of my weapons were in the 40 to 60 damage range. However, in the presence of Ganon's energy, the sword will charge up and do a slightly more impressive 60 damage. The caveat here is that the boost rarely applies in the overworld, and it's mostly useful in Hyrule Castle, at which point most of my weapons were in the 60 to 100 damage range anyway. The Master Sword is truly only useful in the event that the player is fighting low-level enemies and doesn't want any of their good gear to break. This totally flies in the face of what the Master Sword is all about, and its poor implementation in Breath of the Wild for the sake of a stupid durability system is one of the biggest black marks on the game as a whole.
That's cut. So, I'm going to address two things he said. The first point he brought up was, once you find the Master Sword, your quest was over in previous Zelda games, right? Your quest for weapons is over. Obviously, the problem with that, and he's blaming it on the durability system, right? The obvious problem with that is that if I have my Master Sword, right? If I have my Master Sword, and it was the strongest weapon in the game, the most useful weapon in the game, all of these other weapons would have absolutely no use in my inventory whatsoever. So that's point A, which is just in case he wanted it to go back to like the way things used to be, which he didn't say that. So I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there. But for two, the Master Sword was accommodated. What the fuck? It was accommodating for what you had to do to get it. Now, 13 hearts, pull out the Master Sword, 30 damage. Obviously, the 30 damage was underwhelming, which is why they added the DLC, which could potentially upgrade your thing to 60, right? But the point is that, like, right, I feel like the fact that it doesn't break, which it does, it runs out of energy. But I feel like the fact that, like, the Master Sword doesn't break is good enough to fit in with the durability system. Because let's say if you got the Master Sword, right? And it had like 60 power, right? Like 60 whatever base power. And let's say if you go into Ganon's castle and it does 120, what's the point of using any other weapon in the game, period? Which is why they had to obviously nerf it. And then they gave you the opportunity to have it buffed at 60 power later on if you bought the DLC. So I feel like it was necessary. I feel like they did a good job fitting in the Master Sword with this game. I feel like in it, like, video games nowadays, you shouldn't be able to have like just one broken weapon, right? Just literally one broken weapon. Maybe nah, not even. That's why the one hit obliterator had like literally that thing, because that drawback with, like, you can kill enemies in one hit, but you can also get killed in one hit, because literally the one hit obliterator, if they didn't have that and it was literally just a one hit obliterator and you had all your hearts, what's the point of using literally any other weapon in the game? Like, what's the fun in that is what I'm trying to say. Not the point, because you can't use any other weapon when you have the one hit obliterator. But what's the fun in using that? What's the fun in that? You have to think about that. Difficulty.
When I first started my playthrough of Breath of the Wild, I thought Nintendo had absolutely nailed the difficulty. Every time I died, I thought it was my fault for not being stealthy enough, or not being accurate enough with my
Every time you die, it is your fault in Breath of the Wild. No kizzy. Unless you get, like, the ragdoll glitch.
Supply of arrows. Every enemy camp I encountered required legitimate planning to beat. Higher level enemies killed me in 1 or 2 hits, motivating
unless you're doing that fucking dumbass shrine quest in the DLC in Master Mode, where you have to fight all the Guardians, but then they faked you out. Nigga, just get some ancient arrows. That would save you so much time. Oh my gosh, that pissed me off.
legitimate planning to beat. Higher level enemies killed me in 1 or 2 hits, motivating me to master the game's dodging and combat mechanics. However, as I started accumulating Sheikah abilities, cooking ingredients, and weapons, dying became less and less of a possibility. To be clear, I understand that Nintendo games cater to a wider audience than niche titles like Dark Souls, but if a game's challenge vanishes completely, then design tweaks are necessary. If you died frequently in Breath of the Wild after unlocking all of Link's abilities, then you simply weren't taking advantage of the vast array of tools the game gives you that make dying nearly impossible. For starters, you can pause the game at any point to replenish your health with food. Several recipes in the game heal most, all, or more than all of Link's health, and you can carry a whopping 60 food items, meaning that you have practically infinite healing capabilities. Also, should Link somehow die, he will be instantly resurrected by Mipha's Grace, an ability that can be obtained early in the game that allows Link to revive himself to more than full strength upon death. But the ability is on a 24-minute cooldown, so if the player dies twice within that time frame, Link won't self-revive. Unless, of course, they have any fairies in their inventory, which are a rare-ish item that also revives Link upon death. If that wasn't enough, Link also gets a variety of damage upgrades that motivate the player to shy away from the game's simple but rewarding combat system. The Daruk's Protection ability automatically blocks and parries 3 enemy attacks before a short cooldown, totally negating the need for the player to parry or dodge consistently. Urbosa's Fury deals massive damage in a large area around Link, decimating crowds of enemies instantly. Link also has the ability to freeze enemies in time, slow down time in the air, throw bombs, and do a variety of other things that make him an absolute...
There should have definitely been enemies in the game that had immunities to these things. Absolutely. If the gold enemies actually didn't get hit with, or didn't get affected by shock attacks, that would have been good. If you couldn't freeze a certain amount of enemies. I know that the stasis timing was like lower depending upon like the tier of enemy you were fighting. But yeah, I agree with this. But I wouldn't necessarily nitpick the difficulty of the game because you can play this game. So like say if you beat the game already, the only time you really need to encounter enemies is A, if you do like some sort of quest or shrine, or B, if you voluntarily drop into an enemy camp. You know what I'm saying? Like you can spend your time in this game dilly dallying, literally looking at mountains and clouds and shit and trees and all that other stuff. But I mean, most of the game's enjoyment is actually going down and fighting those enemies. So yeah, but I just wouldn't nitpick the difficulty system. But definitely, Link is strong as fuck. Link is strong as hell. That's what I will say. And it would have been nice to see if like some of the enemies you came across just had an immunity to certain assets that you hold. Um, but yeah.
Juggernaut by the time the game is over. The only enemies that pose a threat later in the game are Lynels and the Guardians in Hyrule Castle, and neither of them are hard for the right reasons. Lynels are only difficult because of their massive damage output and enormous health bars, and since Link can heal to his heart's content, pun also intended, the fight ends up being a drawn-out and repetitive grind rather than a challenging battle. As Egoraptor so brilliantly pointed out, poorly designed enemies tend to replace difficulty with time because things that take a long time feel difficult when in reality they aren't. Guardians, on the other hand, are only difficult in Hyrule Castle because there's so many of them. Plus, if you hoard ancient weapons because you don't want them to break, like I did, then that challenge dissipates anyway. This total lack of difficulty takes the game's stakes away. When Link becomes an invincible destroyer of worlds with infinite healing and insane damage output, clearing camps of enemies stops feeling like an adventure and it starts feeling like a chore. When the fear of death is taken away from the player, there's never a reason for them to lean forward in their seat or for their heart rate to increase. The game world becomes less alive without the fear of something that could defeat Link easily. Another thing I hear...
I feel like you should have however many things that you want, whatever 60 food items that you want. But I feel like Link should definitely have like a hunger, or like Link should become full, and that would like take away from that you can eat, like you can replenish your hearts unlimitedly, like until your fucking heart content. But yeah, I definitely agree with this point that he's bringing up. Is it game breaking? Not necessarily, because you also have like a whole load of instances where you can A, run out of food, or B, like you can just die within or like the attack output on like a difficult enemy will just take away most of, if not all of your hearts. Or you feel as though the fight isn't worth it, and then you like back up, like back out of your load, and then you go to a previous load, which I have done on several occasions, because A, that fight is taking up too much of your time, or B, in-game resources. Um, but yeah, I feel like, yes, Link is strong, obviously. It's him against the wild. Should he have been less strong, or should the enemies have been stronger? Absolutely. Is it game breaking? Does it make Breath of the Wild overrated? Not necessarily. No, because you're still getting a level of enjoyment out of fighting these enemies and taking on hordes of them.
Is that Breath of the Wild is like a 3D version of the very first Zelda, but this is one area where they are nothing alike. Absolutely steamroll every trainer in their way, but because of the progression's pacing, it feels earned. The player has succeeded in beating all of the main game challenges, so becoming an unstoppable super trainer doesn't take away from the experience in any way. Being obscenely strong lets the player collect all of the Pokemon they want without the normal stress of managing a less powerful team. It makes catching...
I don't want to hear not one more Pokemon reference.
Them all a...
I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
Killing Ganon is obviously the climactic moment of the story, so having no content beyond that left me feeling shortchanged.
First of all, there's a lot of content that, like, beyond killing that you can do after killing Ganon, beating the game. But I mean, Ganon's role in the story made it so that if he were gone, all the enemies would be gone. There wouldn't be guardians to fight. There would be no silver enemies to fight. And imagine if that was your Breath of the Wild experience, you know?
It would be like if the credits rolled in a movie the moment after the villain was killed. I wanted to see Hyrule Castle free of Ganon's wrath, and I wanted to see Zelda finally return home after 100 years of conflict. I even thought the castle would become a hub world like Kakariko Village, where I could enjoy a peaceful Hyrule.
Bruh.
Who knows, maybe King Rome's ghost would return and congratulate us on our victory.
But then what would you do?
Give us a little pat on the back. But none of that happened.
What would you
Not
do?
only does this design choice leave the story arc of the game in an awkward spot, it also impacts the gameplay in a negative way.
It sort of leaves it at a cliffhanger, but I want to hear how it impacts the gameplay in a negative way.
If the player was free to explore Hyrule after defeating Ganon, Breath of the Wild players could enjoy a legitimate endgame, a structure that would allow the game to stop deliberately taking cool things away from the player for the sake of balance. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, here's some examples. On one fictional night in Hyrule, I noticed a mountain in the distance with a glowing blue beam coming out of the top. I was thrilled. Not only was there no shrine at the top of the mountain, but there was a ghost horse.
Okay.
A ghost horse with infinite stamina and amazing speed. Finally, Breath of the Wild rewarded me for exploring with something unexpected and useful. Naturally, I took my horse to the nearest stables as I thought of what I might name him. Phantom?
Dude. He's mad that he didn't get to put the fucking Lord of the Mountain in a stable. And there was a shrine at the top of Satori. Right here. Right there.
After doing some research online, it appeared there was no way to put the spirit in the stables. This meant that if I used fast travel at any point, Greg would be left behind at my previous location, rendering him useless for the most part. I was furious. Why would you do this, Nintendo? Why add an awesome ghost horse that I had to explore to find and then make it totally obsolete under the game's framework? The most logical explanation is that a horse that powerful would make traveling around the map too easy, a balancing issue, essentially. If the Ghost Owl horse was only available after...
It's because the only reason that it's in the game is to serve sentiment. Like sentimental purpose. Basically, like if you don't know the story behind it, it's because one of the producers of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild died, so they made him essentially the Lord of the Mountain. But we don't know that. In game, basically, every so often there's going to be a glow at Satori Mountain, and if you go there, and if you're able to capture the Lord of the Mountain, or the glow means that the Lord of the Mountain is there on that specific night, you get the Lord of the Mountain, right? Then you get to ride him. He's faster. No enemies attack you while you are on him. He appears every so often on the mountain as a spirit. Why would he be able to be captured at a stable? It's not even a balancing issue. It's like a phenomenon in Breath of the Wild that you actually get to take advantage of, and like you get to ride the horse. Like that in itself is the reward.
After defeating Ganon in the endgame, that having a fast, efficient, and fun way to get around Hyrule wouldn't be an issue. And then they'd added a motorcycle anyway, so why not let you board the ghost horse if you're gonna...
The motorcycle took so fucking long. So fucking long to acquire. 2, it runs off of fuel. And 3, you can't drive it on sand, and you can't drive it in Elden. Like the reason you would have a motorcycle over a horse is because it's faster and it gives you free will, like free control of movement. But a horse will follow a path if it's fully tamed. It's a little slower, but it'll follow a path automatically, and you basically don't have to control it.
Robbing the player of cool things happens during the final fight with Ganon when he's in classic pig form. Zelda gives Link the Bow of Light just for the final battle.
Nigga.
The bow is incredibly powerful, has nearly infinite range, and has infinite ammo. It looks stunning, too. Truly the ultimate weapon for a hero like Link. However, as soon as Link defeats Ganon and the game resets, The bow is gone. If Breath of the Wild...
Because you needed the bow of light to defeat this fucking big ass form of pig malice, which is called Ganon. First of all, that was a terrible boss fight. Too easy. Secondly, imagine using the bow of light on literally any other. Imagine basically having an infinite amount of ancient arrows and an ancient bow.
Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the rest of the game's bosses.
You might be onto something with the bosses.
Some of the most memorable moments in previous Zelda games and in video games in general have come in the form of boss battles, from Bowser to Dr. Wily.
I'm just going to say this right now so we can get this out the way. The boss fights in Breath of the Wild were completely underwhelming.
To King K. Rool. There's nothing quite like going up against a difficult boss and succeeding through the use of precise gameplay and strategy. Yet Breath of the Wild misses the mark in this area as well, which is surprising since Nintendo has historically been one of the best developers in the business in terms of crafting fantastic bosses. Sure, they may be formulaic, you hit their weak spot 3 times and you win, but that never hampered the experience for me until now. Before I discuss the 4 main bosses before Ganon and Breath of the Wild, I need to address the dungeons they're housed in, the Divine Beasts. Zelda games have come under scrutiny in the past for making dungeons too predictable, and for good reason. Players got tired of the classic sequence of entering a dungeon, encountering a problem, finding an item that fixes said problem, and then defeating the boss. So when I heard that Breath of the Wild's dungeons broke the Zelda formula once again, I thought that meant the dungeons were designed more creatively, allowing the player to use more than just one clear-cut item to get through the slew of enemies and rooms. The last thing I expected to find was giant, empty puzzle rooms, but here we are. The more I reflect on why I dislike the Divine Beasts, the more I realize the hated Zelda formula got so much right. I mean, we're talking about one of the most successful and beloved series in the history of gaming. I don't think players' complaints came from the fact that there were enemies and items and treasure chests, but rather from the implementation of those things. But instead of changing the existing conventions of dungeons slightly to fit Breath of the Wild's more unstructured gameplay, Nintendo threw traditional dungeons out of the window and gave us 100-foot-tall puzzle shrines shaped like animals. And worse yet, the puzzles were more frustrating than they were fun. When I encountered my first Divine Beast, I was once again overcome with excitement. Divine Beasts were supposed to be a pivotal moment in Link's journey to reassemble the Dream Team and defeat Calamity Ganon, and it certainly appears as such at first. I had to shoot and fight my way to the beast itself while riding on the back of the Prince of the Zoras, a sequence that demanded several accurate bow shots in a row, all with lightning roaring in the background. I finally mounted the beast and drew my favorite claymore in preparation for battle. Instead, I was faced with globs of goo and a series of frustrating puzzles. Ideally, a puzzle gives...
I feel like whatever. I watched the Hardy review of Breath of the Wild, and that guy also critiqued the Divine Beast. Although I think he was being extremely hard on the Divine Beast for what they did great. Now, Divine Beast are probably the best combination of, like, it's probably going to be the most difficult thing you don't necessarily have to look up online to find out how to do it. It's basically just like a giant shrine with more thought out puzzle pieces. And like I said earlier with like the Sheikah Slate movement of the Divine Beast, if you know how to use that, then you're pretty good. You'll be set. The best one, I think, is obviously the 5th one because it was like pretty difficult. But if you use your brain, you will figure it out for sure. No problem. Like, you don't have to look it up. You can look it up, but you don't have to look it up. That's what the Divine Beasts are. You can look it up if you want convenience, but they're not too difficult to where you have to look it up. But they are more difficult than what you are used to. So I feel like the Divine Beasts were actually in a good spot. Divine Beast, Rudanya could have been a little harder. I feel like Ruda was a good Divine Beast. Meta was definitely a good Divine Beast. I did both of those without looking it up. Naboris, I feel like that was definitely the hardest one. But I haven't played Naboris recently. Actually, when we play Breath of the Wild after, we're gonna be going towards Naboris. But I haven't played Naboris in like I think it's been 2 years, 3 years since I was actually in Naboris. That's crazy. But yeah, I feel like the Divine Beasts were in a good place. The fifth Divine Beast was pretty good because it was difficult. You might have to have looked it up, but I mean, if you use your brain, if you use all your prior knowledge that you've accumulated while playing Breath of the Wild, while beating the game and then doing the DLC, there's no reason to why you shouldn't be able to do that fifth Divine Beast. So I feel like any critique on the Divine Beasts were like really, really, really dramatic, and people just had like high expectations. They either wanted it to be like really, really, really difficult, and to you to use all like utilize your utilities in the game like to the max, which it already does a good job of doing. It utilizes like the utilities in the game like pretty nicely, but I mean, or like the other is like they just wanted it to be what like straight to a boss fight like this guy, like not even a puzzle. I will admit at first I was like I was 14 when I first got my hands on, yeah, 2017. Yeah, I was 14 when Breath of the Wild came out, and when I first came across Ruta was my first Divine Beast. When I first was in Ruta, after doing the water segment, I was like, what the fuck? I said, YouTube.com, help a nigga out. But now, I feel like the Divine Beasts were in a good place for you to exercise your brain without necessarily having to look it up. So
Gives the person trying to solve it all of the necessary information, and then it's up to that person to assemble that information in the correct way. Further, solving the puzzle should be rewarding. To further quote Ego Raptor, solving puzzles should be an aha, not an ah come on moment. Yet, Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts are filled with the latter.
That's subjective.
Firstly, the majority of the Divine Beast puzzles can be solved by cycling Sheikah abilities until something works. Secondly, the design choice to have puzzles on such a massive scale...
No. I feel like that's what he did, and what we should actually be saying is cycling through Sheikah abilities until you find the correct one in which the puzzle was intended to be used for.
...demands that the player spend an absurd amount of time backtracking. On several occasions, the player must interact with something on one side of the beast that changes something on the other.
And, I'm sorry. What I've noticed is that when you go into the Divine Beast, you aren't doing anything you haven't done before. Actually, nothing that's too foreign to where you'd be like, I'd have no idea how to do it if I didn't look it up.
So, if the player wants to actually put thought into the puzzle rather than button mashing, they would have to spend at least a minute running through hallways and rooms to check their progress. About halfway through the first Divine Beast puzzle, I was faced with an obstacle I couldn't get past. A waterfall was coming from the ceiling above, and I needed to somehow redirect the water to spin a water wheel in another room.
Ruda.
I tried everything,
Easy.
but no matter how...
Dude, nigga, all you had to do was, put it to the third tick on the fucking map. It wasn't that hard.
How many slate abilities I tried, or how many arrows I shot into the stream, nothing happened. After almost half an hour of running around and trying everything I could, I finally paused the game in defeat to look the answer up online, which is probably my least favorite thing to do when I play a game. When I paused the game, it revealed a map of the Divine Beast, complete with a button that changed the angle.
Nigga, that's the first fucking thing that's revealed to you! My boy skipped the cutscene. Yo, he skipped the cutscene. Oh my god, he skipped the cutscene. Bro, yo, this man skipped the cutscene. He was not trying to listen to that ass talk for 5 minutes. Oh my god, he skipped the cutscene. Did my switch turn off? What the fuck? He skipped the cutscene. He skipped the cutscene. Bro, it's like not reading the instructions and then you're confused on what to do.
Angle of the waterfall. This was the epitome of an ah, come on moment.
Bro, you skipped the cutscene literally showing you the map. Literally, in every single Divine Beast, there is an initial Sheikah, whatever location. I'm just gonna call it like a Sheikah beacon, whatever. There's an initial beacon that you have to uncover. Every single Divine Beast, there's an initial beacon that you have to activate before you can actually start completing different puzzle pieces, right? What he did was he skipped through the dialogue of the dead champion guiding you through the objective. And Ruda is everyone's first divine beast, so that's probably why he didn't realize. But he skipped through that. Not only that, he skipped through it, got to the pilot, and skipped through the part where it showed you the fucking map on this on the Sheikah slate. He was not trying to listen to that shit. He said, "Hurry the fuck up!"
I consider my pause menu to be outside of the game world, so being forced to pause over and over to solve the puzzle
That
totally
that
ruined
is 100% your fault. I'm sorry. That is 100% your fault. That's hilarious, though.
my sense of immersion. I no longer felt like an adventurer defeating the forces of evil, but rather a guy on his couch navigating a menu with a Switch controller. This feature would be almost excusable if the game made any effort to tell you that you can manipulate the puzzles from within the pause menu, but it doesn't.
Okay, this part right here. Watch. Please watch. Y'all think I'm lying. This shit even says, it even says current position, terminal. It shows you where each of the terminals are. Move trunk back.
What's even more baffling about the Divine Beasts is the fact that the design team chose to make them puzzles in the first place. As I mentioned before,
See,
almost every
it's either someone is saying that the puzzle should have been extremely hard, or that someone is upset with the fact that there are puzzles in the first place. But I feel like the lead up to all of the puzzles was underwhelming and too easy. That's the thing. Like the Divine Beast fight, like when you're fighting the Divine Beast to get inside the beast, I feel like those segments were too easy. Is it game breaking? No.
avenue for exploration in the overworld leads to a shrine, so why make the Divine Beasts puzzles? It's not like entering a giant room and solving a puzzle is a fresh experience for the player, especially by the time they've reached multiple Divine Beasts. While I would have been totally satisfied with a more traditional dungeon system,
because again, like you talk about these powers like that you've acquired being overpowered, but you then again just want it to be handed to you. Would it be better if you had what he described, or sorry, what you described to be a very, very overpowered? What makes Link the hand of God striking down enemies, or whatever he said? I don't know, but the bottom line is that he said Link is overpowered because of these abilities. So would you rather have a boss fight, a boss segment, a puzzle, and then a boss fight, and then you acquire that overpowered ability? Or would you just rather have like a segment and then like just a boss fight, like a cakewalk towards that overpowered ability?
even settled for an epic boss fight with no puzzle element attached at all. However, that would only work if the bosses were unique or fun to fight. The bosses in Breath of the Wild are truly one of the biggest missed opportunities I have ever seen in a video game, let alone one with such acclaim.
I wouldn't say one of the biggest missed opportunities in every video, because I know where that animosity comes from, bro. Trust me. I also critique games on my channel, on my YouTube channel, so I know where that animosity comes from. I'm saying that same energy is not warranted with the bosses in Breath of the Wild, but I understand where Holmes is coming from. They were definitely underwhelming to an extent. The only one that was difficult, or sorry, that was sort of versatile was Thunderblack Ganon. But I mean, I guess you could use the argument that like, oh, the boss fights were easier because you did an entire segment and an entire puzzle leading up to it. But I mean, again, it could have been more versatile than it was.
First off, the bosses in each Divine Beast look practically identical, which is odd considering Breath of the Wild's visuals have great variety in nearly every other aspect of gameplay. But no, all 4 of the main bosses in Breath of the Wild are goopy robot Ganon monsters with glowing eyeballs.
Bro, look. That's the point. They wouldn't share the same name if they didn't like resemble each other in the slightest.
And if people are going to
Light
criticize
Ganon.
past Zelda dungeons for being too predictable, then Breath of the Wild deserves the same scrutiny. Egoraptor jokes about how every Zelda boss is just shooting a big glowing eye with an arrow, yet he praised Breath of the Wild wholeheartedly. Every single
he's
Divine
on
Beast
that
boss,
ass
though,
ego, whatever
yet
the fuck your
Egoraptor
name
jokes
is.
about how every Zelda
Egoraptor.
Breath
He's
of the
on
Wild
that
deserves the
ass.
same scrutiny. Egoraptor
He's
jokes
on
about
that
how every
ass,
Zelda boss is
Egoraptor.
just shooting a big glowing eye with an arrow, yet he
But
praised Breath of the
but
Wild
yet you
wholeheartedly.
praise Breath of the Wild wholeheartedly. Yo, we're on your ass, Egoraptor. You praise Breath of the Wild wholeheartedly while talking shit about the other Zelda game, bro. We're on that ass, Egoraptor. Keep it 100.
Every single Divine Beast boss does in fact have a glowing eyeball, and instead of using a unique item, you just use another Sheikah Slate ability to defeat them. So how exactly has Breath of the Wild improved on Zelda bosses? To me, the bosses in past Zelda games were vastly superior. It's been years since I touched Twilight Princess, but I still vividly remember fighting Stalord the Twilight Fossil and Argarok the Twilight Dragon. Those bosses were memorable.
Those
because
even
they
look
looked
better
different,
than the
they were
fucking.
in
I never
different
played Twilight
settings,
Princess.
And they were defeated in totally different
That
ways.
shit just looks
You
better.
know what I remember from Breath of the Wild's bosses? Fighting 4 equally annoying robot monsters while inside 4 bigger robot monsters. That's it. Is that a greatest game of all time experience? It certainly doesn't feel that way. Breath of the Wild's
Okay.
overworld bosses do a better job on the aesthetic front, but that's really it. Sure, a stone talus may look different than a Hinox, but they don't play differently. Both make you shoot their big, glaring weakness and then run in to deal as much damage as you can before they wake up. The settings of these mini-bosses also play no role in their gameplay, making these encounters feel soulless in general. Fighting a Hinox atop Mount Nairu will go the same way as fighting a Hinox all the way.
Where the fuck are the like what he said in Twilight Princess? Where's that shit that's like in the middle of a quicksand pit, dude, in Gerudo, huh? Whoa, we get the Molduga. Where the sky bosses? I agree with this. You know, I don't agree with what he's presenting, but I agree with why he's saying it. Absolutely.
On the other side of the map. There is one mini-boss that does incorporate the setting into the fight, though, the Molduga. It's worth mentioning this particular mini-boss because it's an example of how well all of the other bosses could have been designed. The fight is only accessible in the desert area of the game, so the encounter itself reflects that. The Molduga, which is a worm-like creature, burrows underground to ambush Link, dealing huge damage. You can either ride a sand seal to outrun the Molduga and wait for it to breach, or you can place a bomb behind you and detonate it as the Molduga approaches.
Yeah, the level design behind the Molduga. There's always ruins where a Molduga is, which is basically gives Link a place where he can stand and throw a bomb down.
Will stun it and let you deal damage. Already the player is having...
But I mean, listen, it's different. The lead up is different, but it's practically the same as the Stone Talus and the Hinox. You're exploiting a weakness. You're running in, doing as much damage as you possibly can before running back, like by the time it recovers, which is basically the same as what you do with the Stone Talus, what you do with the Hinox. It's pretty much the same.
To think on a level far beyond shoot at their weakness with an arrow. And Breath of the Wild...
Yeah. It's so basically, it's find the weakness, do damage, then run, instead of shoot at the weakness, do damage, then run.
Filled with these thoughtful and engaging boss encounters.
I don't feel like the Molduga is any more engaging than Stone Taluses and Hinoxes. Maybe only because they're rare and they're in the sand, but that's it. The gameplay to those boss fights could have been a lot more versatile in all 3 respects.
I've been a forest monster who you defeat by chopping trees and pinning him to the ground, or a boss fight in the open ocean where you have to lure them to land to deal damage. But because of Breath of the Wild's copy and paste game design formula, we got 50 mediocre boss fights instead of 10 great ones.
What could have been?
This isn't so much a critique as it is a reflection of what Breath of the Wild could have been. If you're a Breath of the Wild fan and you've made it this far into the video, I want to emphasize to you that I'm not tearing the game apart out of malice.
No,
I make
we know.
these points
We
and
know.
bring these design issues to
Obviously,
light because
we know.
people act like Breath of the Wild is or is one of the greatest games ever.
It is.
While I obviously disagree, the tragedy of it all is I think it could have been the greatest game ever with just a few
think it
design
is.
changes. Nintendo gave Breath of the Wild players a gorgeous world to explore and took the Zelda franchise in an ambitious new direction, which I applaud them for. But could you imagine if that gorgeous world was filled with equally vibrant experiences? What if you approached every new obstacle with no knowledge of what was to come? What if every boss looked and felt different? What if the game was actually challenging and made you feel like a legendary adventurer for succeeding? What if you could collect your favorite gear and know it was never going to break? What if side quests gave unique rewards? What if the Master Sword was the best sword in the game and getting it felt as good as it did in past Zeldas? The list goes on.
Okay. We'll end it right there, and we're gonna do a conclusion. So basically, I feel like what drew this person to make this video is that he wanted Breath of the Wild to embody the better aspects of all the previous Zelda games and put them into Breath of the Wild. And when they didn't necessarily do that, he got disappointed. But now, here's why I have a problem with his critiques. Now, first of all, he did not convince me that Breath of the Wild is overrated because a lot, like his main points were highly debunkable. With the Divine Beast especially, I mean, the Divine Beast is subjective, but I don't think that... In one point he said, there's like one point where he said that the Divine Beast's abilities that you gain from beating the Divine Beast are overpowered and it makes Link like a god against your opponents or the monsters in Hyrule. But then he said that there should not have been a puzzle in the Divine Beast because it gets repetitive and rather just a boss fight. Now, sure, you could pull the we're making shrines and stuff. We already are doing shrines. Divine Beast is just another puzzle, just like the shrines are. First of all, it's a more elaborate shrine, if you will, a much more elaborate shrine, if you will. It's like the whole purpose of adding a bigger version of a shrine in there is because you have completed so many shrines to begin with and have used your brain and the game's utilities in different ways, and then it's time for you in the Divine Beast in 4 different occasions to use what you have learned throughout the shrines and basically complete a much bigger puzzle. That's number 1. And 2, the puzzle is necessary because obviously he said that the abilities that you get after completing the Divine Beast are overpowered. It makes it like a god. But then they're saying, let's not introduce a puzzle. Let's just have there be a boss fight. So basically, make acquiring those abilities easier than what they are. Which obviously, no, you can't have that. If something makes Link overpowered, then you want the process in getting that to be as difficult as possible so it would be more gratifying, more rewarding, and more warranted for the player. The problem that he said with the armor system was actually there in the game, basically a defense system while switching out armor sets. I'm not going to misquote him. So what I do remember him saying was that once you have like a certain armor set, it's viable from 5 hours to the game all the way to 50 hours in the game, which is not necessarily true because you have multiple armor sets that serve different purposes that are all useful throughout the entirety of Breath of the Wild, you know? And it's not like you can buy, first of all, you have like the stealth armor, which is probably one of the most useful armor sets that you get in the beginning of the game. But like I said earlier, it's expensive, and by the time you come across it, you aren't necessarily going to have all of the all of the resources that you need in exchange for rupees to buy that gear. So I never thought that gear was too easy to get. Maybe the Rito gear was a little too easy to get because by that time I had enough and I just got it in a shop, you know. I feel like the Flame Guard gear, other than that, there wasn't like an armor set that A, was too easy to get, and B, it wouldn't have mattered because that's not the only armor set, that's not the only piece of armor that is going to prove useful during my time in Breath of the Wild. Then he said that the durability system should not have been in the game, essentially, which obviously it should be necessary. The only problem that I do have with the durability system is that your weapons break a little too easily. Thirdly, he said that or I don't even know if it's third point, but he said that the Master Sword wasn't like your end all of a weapon search. Like it wasn't the be all end all. Like it wasn't the pinnacle of weapons. Maybe it was a little underwhelming, sure, but obviously I feel like they balanced it out in a good way. You know, I feel like they did balance it out in a good way, definitely. Then again, if you have just this overpowered weapon that doesn't break, what's the point of using any other weapon in the game? And then all the other points I sort of agreed with, but then again, they weren't like game breaking. And also, like, he messed up on some things. You know, he messed up on the fact that the shrines had didn't have like different tiered enemies in terms of the major, minor, and modest test of strengths. He messed up on like the divine beasts, which was shown, or like the map of the divine beast. He could have said that part like had like a lack of intuitive gameplay or something, but it's no, he didn't see it, and therefore my what the fuck am I saying? The divine beast experience was ruined for me. Yeah, because that was entirely your fault. And then also wanting to register the Lord of the Mountain was kind of silly, you know. So, and also he was kind of overly focused on the rewards of like side quests and like main quests, and therefore deemed it as sort of annoying rather than like the experience. Like, my point on that was that people tend to value the experience that quest provides. Side quests give you like force you to go out of your way and experience things that literally you would have no other way of experiencing, like building a town, like making or like finding someone's wife or husband or whatever, or like saving construction workers that got stuck on top of the Gerudo piers that they were building. It's not even a pier, like the whatever, like the bridge. We'll just say that it's like a bridge, whatever. But like construction workers that are attacked by monsters, you have to go save that. Go give this girl a guardian ball, an ancient ball, so she would. Or no. Show this girl, this guardian obsessed girl, a picture of a guardian, so that she can release the ball of a shrine. You know. Also, he had a problem with the blessing shrines, but obviously all blessing shrines require you to do something prior to it. It's not like, oh, I found the shrine, I go in there. It just so happened to be a blessing shrine. No, it was like, I beat Eventide Island, now a shrine pops up, and that in that blessing shrine, whatever's in that shrine is my reward for completing Eventide Island. Blessing shrines always occur as a reward for already going out of your way to do a daunting task, which is why I didn't agree with his critique on the blessing shrines. But yeah, and everything else that he said, which I sort of agreed with, wasn't really game breaking. Again, the bosses could have been versatile, but I don't. The bosses, like, you're gonna spend maybe less than an hour fighting all of the bosses in general. Like, your main experience is comprised of going out in the world, exploring, doing quests, and fighting enemies. Therefore, the bosses, the mini bosses, should I say, don't really negate the game overall. It doesn't really make it overrated. And then another thing that I agreed with to one of his points was that Link was strong, like, compared to his enemies. Although he did sort of forget that enemies also go up as the player goes up, like, in strength. Like I said at one point, red bokoblins don't stay red. But yeah, that was That was something that he missed. But then again, Link is really strong. The menu, going into the menu screen to heal, not only makes the gameplay choppy, but there's no limit to how much you can heal. And once you become powerful enough, and if an enemy is actually kicking your ass, you can always just resort to going back a load. So I agree. Link is pretty strong. I feel like there should be enemies that have certain immunities to his abilities. But other than that, this video kind of failed to convince me that Breath of the Wild is overrated, because a lot of the issues that he had weren't actually real issues, and the valid issues that he had weren't necessarily game breaking, because although Link is strong, at the end of the day, a lot of the enjoyment of the game is derived out of being able to kill the enemies in the game. Because a lot of the time enemies are grouped. Like if you were only effective against one enemy, right? Like a one-on-one fight, and let's say a group of bokoblins swarm you, and then it becomes hard. Sure, it might be more enjoyable, but I mean, people enjoy being able to take on all those multiple enemies. And then if that was hard, imagine like the bosses, dude. Imagine the bosses. But definitely, I feel like there should have been enemies that don't just exploit the weak spot, attack them a bunch of times, then run away before they recover, which are the three mini bosses in the overworld. Obviously, I agree with that absolutely 100%. And then, there should definitely be enemies that have immunities to certain assets that you have as the player. So Link isn't like this god, that just can the difficulty does get kind of stale after a while. Because I've done pretty much everything there is to do on my account, other than like literally get 999% of all of my items, like just stockpile like items. I mean, I've done pretty much everything there is to do, which is why we're playing different Breath of the Wild, on different accounts, so we can restart the game and replay it, yeah. But overall, the video failed to convince me that there is like Breath of the Wild didn't deserve its best game of all time title. I still feel like it's the best game of all time, and yeah. Durability system is obviously necessary, because if I have a certain weapon and if there was no durability system, then every other weapon of that kind that I find in the overworld would be completely obsolete and useless. There would be no point in picking up that same weapon again. It gives a natural refresh, which is needed, Then I think we got into the armor system. You'd want there to be like a reward, like some sort of element of reward that you get for getting potentially game-changing abilities. And his proposal was to scrap the puzzle, because he just so happened to skip over the part where it showed him the map of the Divine Beast, which I don't even know how you were hitting terminals if you didn't see the map. But anyways, excuse me. Maybe you physically saw them, but yeah, he said just scrap the puzzles and just add in a boss fight. So basically, cheese your way to what you said was an overpowered ability, or actually have a reward so that getting that ability is rewarding and warranted. It failed to convince me that Breath of the Wild was overrated. It's not. I still think it's one of the greatest games to have ever released, especially in our generation. So anyways, this comes from Hit Detection Reviews. Although I didn't agree with most of the video, I'm going to give him a like. You know what I'm saying? Support your boy. It'll be in the link in the script when this turns into a YouTube video. It'll be in the link in the description below, because first of all, you got to be bold to post an unpopular opinion like this. Even if your points aren't really necessarily true, it takes some level of boldness to post like an unpopular opinion. So I agree with him to that extent. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you check him out. And I also post like unpopular opinions on my channel. So I know how it is. I'm also pretty critical of games. I do game essays sort of like this one, although I don't like recycle the trailer 50 times to fill up the hey, but you got to do what you got to do when you're starting out. 40 subs, make sure y'all hit that subscribe button, because there might be a video that he drops that you do like and that you do agree with, you know what I'm saying? But yeah,